the way to find this area. So everyone, thank you very much for coming to our meeting this morning. A special thanks for Pak Iwan Sahril, the Director General from the Ministry of Education, and also the Education Working Group Chair for G20 Indonesia. Thank you very much for Pak Jisman Siman, who will present the plan for how T20 India will contribute to the G20 process in 2023, so soon. And also after that, we will have intensive discussion among the participants to learn about lesson learned from G20 and T20 Indonesia 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, our today's meeting will be moderated and facilitated by our colleagues from GPEC. Here, I would like to introduce you Megan Baliste from GPEC Argentine, who come far away, 40 hours flight from Buenos Aires to Jakarta, and also Ramiro Albrio from GPEC, also from Argentina. So for the first session, I would like to give the floors for the Pak Iwan Sahril to provide special remarks for today's meeting. Please, Pak Iwan. Thank you. Yes.
Good morning, everybody. Selamat pagi. How are you today? Did you have a good breakfast? Did you have a good sleep? Did your team win the last match in the World Cup? Or your favorite team? Germany still has hope, right? Right, one more win and you are through, right? That's okay. My wife is a big supporter of Germany. She's optimistic, so I'm sure that it's true. We need to keep the discussion until the final alive, because if she needs to, we need to watch together. So there's a dynamic. Whatever she's supporting, I'm not supporting. Whatever I'm supporting, she's not supporting. But yeah, that's the story of our household in terms of World Cup. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to share about education working group, maybe takeaways, I can say, and also looking forward to the India's presidency in G20. And I know the topic is not specific about education, so I think I'm just going to use education and let the audience later, the participants, to make the connection with whatever it is that that you are focusing on. First of all, of course, for us in Indonesia, it's not easy to facilitate the discussions in G20 this year. However, in Education Working Group, we have a very like the collective sense of urgency in terms of issues that matter for education and how we can recover together and recover stronger from the pandemic. This theme about recover together, recover stronger has actually two dimensions. The first one is recover together. It's more like short term, how we can recover from the pandemic, the impact of the pandemic as soon as possible, by the collectiveness, or in Indonesia, we call this the gotong royong spirit, the mutual assistance among us. And recover stronger has also the meaning that we need to use the momentum to lay the foundation for future. So lay the foundation for perhaps another crisis, either pandemic or other kinds of crisis. So then our system be it in education or other sectors, can be more resilient in facing the crisis. So therefore, in the context of education, our students, which are basically for the development of our future human resources, or the current human resources, if you believe in the lifelong learning philosophy, can cope with the crisis and then can still advance whatever agenda that we are having for our development. If you look at the Leaders' Declaration, the Bali Leaders' Declaration, just recently, this is still November, right? November. It was in the mid, it felt like 2 months ago already, but it's like 15 and 16 of November. We can have like, there are 7 points here that I want to state at the beginning before then I talk more specifically about the relations with the future of work. The first one is the emphasis that education is human right. Here the statement is that access to education is a human right and a pivotal tool for inclusive and sustainable economic recovery. So the connection between education and development is very clear. So this is something that we need to protect. Number 2, it's about transforming education summit. We know that the United Nations have the agenda for using the momentum in 2022 to call for all governments to have a strong commitment in action in terms of please protect education in terms of the recovery. Like for instance, like education financing. Because of, yes, we need to finance a lot of other things because of the COVID pandemic, but for the recovery, taking away the money from education is not a good idea, basically. And it's about how we use this momentum, not only about, okay, fund education for recovery, but again, how to transform, how to reimagine, redesign education in the way that we think is more relevant for the future. The third one is focusing on developing countries and also solidarity in terms of how we recover and transform the system. We will act in solidarity, in particular with developing countries. This is something with the Global South agenda, to rebuild more resilient, tech-enabled, accessible, and effective education systems. Here, the Indonesia presidency is committed to actually bringing the voices that are considered maybe in the G20 forums, the marginal voices, to front and center in our conversations in issues, including in education. So the angles on other nations, especially developing countries, because we invited the Pacific Islands, we invited also like some countries in Africa and other developing nations to be part of our special invitees, so therefore can contribute to the discussion and the product of the deliverables that we have produced. And number 4 is about the ecosystem approach. So the statement is, we will empower relevant actors within and beyond G20. And the agenda is, again, for transforming education, to remove barriers to education, improve teaching and learning environments, and support transitions within and across all stages of education. And then again, there is a gender perspective with emphasis on women and girls. So it's very clear for, and this is part of our discussion in Education Working Group. One of the principles that we, especially from Indonesia in our issue note, is that how to protect the most vulnerable groups during this recovery and also for transformation. Number 5, it's about the importance of well-being. The statement says, we also underscore the importance of learners' well-being in their preparation for work, meaningful participation, and contribution to more equitable, inclusive, and sustainable society. So we believe that, again, the pandemic raised the concern about the importance of well-being for us should not be overlooked, and not only in education, but also how we prepare the human resources, the human capital for our workforce. And number 6 is about our commitment to sustainable development goals. The statement says, we reaffirm the importance of education for sustainable development and our commitment to SDG to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and training. So highlighting this goal is one of the foundations in our declaration in Education Working Group. So it's even stronger than before because again, pandemic has exacerbated the learning gap, the learning crisis, especially for the most vulnerable groups. And the last one, number 7, is about the importance of lifelong learning at all levels. So the statement says, we are committed to promoting lifelong learning at all levels amidst the changing nature of work and encourage partnership in this regard. So meaning like it takes ability to educate a child, but not educate a child, educate a human being here, because it's not just about schools, but also work included there. So those are the 7 points in the Leaders Declaration and about education. Now I'd like to switch my sharing with you today with the story about the Education Working Group more specifically. The first of all, I think we need to also be reminded about how we come up with the issue note. The issue note that we put forward in the Education Working Group came from, again, the concern for how we can recover and then, but not only recover, and how we can build a stronger education system moving forward. So we talked to a lot of think tanks. Semeru is definitely one of them. So thank you so much, Semeru, for contributing to the issue note. Back then, I think it was actually 1 year from now, right? It was November, if I'm not mistaken. We talked with like international organizations. We talked a lot with thought partners, and we came up with 4 topics that we want to put forward in Education Working Group. The first one is universal quality education. Why this is important? Again, first, this is about strengthening the commitment to SDG, especially SDG 4. But we want to call to all G20 countries that it is important to not only think about this commitment, universal, how we can ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all, but also now it's even more important because the pandemic has exacerbated, widened the learning crisis gap, especially for the most vulnerable groups. It can be, we can look at this from countries' perspective, because even in most developed countries, you have a lot of like problems of widening a learning crisis gap everywhere. But also we can see from the global ecosystem, where countries with like maybe stronger foundation in terms of economic, in terms of their education, like the quality of teachers and so on, can better cope with the pandemic than others. So how we can like together, we believe that for the development for all countries to flourish, I think we need to have the solidarity to work together to how we can share our success and also help others. Just like in pandemic, you've got vaccine, it's not enough just for yourself, but you need to make everyone also share that, so then everyone can be safe, and that means everybody can move forward. So we not think about just only for ourselves. Number 2 is about digital technology in education. Pandemic has highlighted the use of digital technology. I think one of like the sectors that is usually very known as stubborn towards the advancement in technology is education. We know that how education is often criticized for being trapped in the industrial revolution 2.0, while we are now already in industrial revolution 4.0. Suddenly, during 1 year, what happened, I think, not only in Indonesia, but all around the world, the schools and teachers, parents are forced to use technology because there's no other choice. I think in the context of Indonesia, we learned from the beginning, before the pandemic, because our minister was tasked by our president, Joko Widodo, because of his because of his portfolio as a technology entrepreneur. So we did a survey for Indonesia about how to be successful in using technology for transforming the education system. One thing that we learned was that it's not that our teachers are not able to use technology or are not willing to use technology. It's more like the anxiety. There is a huge anxiety level when it comes to technology. Interestingly, when it comes to mobile phones, suddenly the anxiety is kind of gone. So one of conclusions that we decided when we designed our transformation in education in Indonesia is it must be app. It must be app-based application. If it's like a desktop or something like that, there is anxiety, high anxiety level. So to lower that, it must be mobile friendly. So what happened during the pandemic is that everyone is forced. So suddenly, even like the most, like let's say the senior teachers and also lecturers are started to use technology, started to play around. Effectiveness is something else. Effectiveness, let's say that's, but the willingness to experiment with how to use technology is a huge thing. Maybe something that we can only achieve in maybe 10 years. It happened in 1 year. So we believe this is something that we need to talk about in G20 and also share with other countries. Of course, not only about technology, like the use of digital technology, but also the digital divide. We know about the issue of equity there for areas that, so we want to learn like what's happening here. And the third one is solidarity and partnership. Now, the third topic is very unique Indonesian. Actually, this is what we want to promote in our education working group. It's a translation, our translation of the word gotong royong. Gotong royong is Indonesian philosophy that has worked powerfully in our many contexts. But in terms of education, our education transformation, we really rely on this local wisdom to make people or the ecosystem move towards the goal to transform the education system. What is gotong royong? I think in a very short and simple way, the way I perceive gotong royong is it's not just about work collaboratively. That's one aspect of it. Gotong royong has a sense of social empathy towards others, and then that makes someone or some groups feel responsibility. So there is a social empathy, then followed by social responsibility to work on certain problems and to solve that together. This is, although Indonesia has hundreds of cultures, but gotong royong can be found everywhere. And like, for instance, now there is an earthquake in West Java, in Cianjur. The spirit of gotong royong, just suddenly people just help, and it's from everywhere. And this is what we feel that we want to promote in our working group. But we use the term solidarity and partnership because there is no English translation for gotong royong. And the last one, of course, the future of work post COVID-19. Of course, this is G20. G20 is more like economic forum. So it is very important for us to talk about how to connect education with the future of work. Previously, prior to pandemic, Industrial Revolution 4.0 has already been talked about a lot, that it is disruption is the new normal. It is disruptive era. So we need to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. We know this, but then pandemic has further disrupted the how we see things, what is relevant for the future. So we believe this is also very important to talk about, especially the role of education to the future of work in our education working group. So the last thing, I want to talk about two things. First, about what are like the main takeaways for recovery and what are the main takeaways for transformation in the context of education and also related to the future of work. For recovery, like it is like all G20 countries believe that first we need to focus on the foundational skills, namely, especially literacy and numeracy as the hyper-focused strategy for recovery. We need to protect this first because we believe this is the foundation for lifelong learning. The ability for someone to receive the information, to produce the information in a way that is critical, in the way that is responsible, productive, and etc. And be it in text or also in numbers. But also before for recovery, the education ecosystem need to do diagnostic assessment. We need to see, because the impact of pandemic is not equal. Students come even from the same kind of community, their situations can be different. So teachers need to differentiate they are learning their instruction, so then can accelerate the recovery, especially on the foundational skills. And the third one, the strategy for recovery should focus on the most vulnerable part of the population. So the G20 countries believe these are like the core strategy for recovery in education. For transformation, especially related to the future of work, of course, the philosophy here is how to develop human resources or ecosystem for lifelong learning. So we can have the attitude of learn, unlearn, and relearn all the time. The first one that is highlighted in the discussion is the use of digital technology. It goes without saying, this is the currency for the future the global workforce. We need to be mindful about how to use technology in our education, or at the very least, like the mindset of how to be able later to use technology. Like in Indonesia, we have in our curriculum, for instance, how to use computational thinking unplugged. So learning about the logic of later, because technology is actually the modality. The core skills is still about the thinking skills. So there are ways that we can use when we have very limited resources in technology. But this is something that education needs to invest in for future workforce. The second one, changing the curricula. The curricula needs to first, of course, include the 21st century skills and cover issues such as climate change, artificial intelligence, and also there was a very live discussion about how to integrate the academic and vocational education, especially at the tertiary level. This is something that all G20 countries feel very important to do in terms of making our education relevant for the future workforce. And of course, the change of curricula will implicate to redefining the role of teachers. So what is the role of teachers then? If we are using the curricula that is different, that is more relevant to the workforce, then how teachers can also see themselves, how they can design learning in a way that is aligned with the vision of the curricula. We also talk about how it is important to involve the practitioners, the industry practitioners to also design the curricula. So it's not only to teach, but also part of the thinkers in designing the curricula for the education. And after that, of course, it's about the schools also need to be reimagined. What is school? Is school is limited to building physical spaces? What about new learning spaces that we can actually explore? We are exploring about how there are educational institutions outside the schools, the physical space, and also the digital ecosystem. So how to look at learning spaces with the lifelong learning perspective, because it doesn't stop with the education, the traditional definition of educational institutions. We also talk about transforming TVET, technical vocational education and training, and the tertiary education. And this is considered as the main engine to face the future of work. So how education systems can transform their vocational education. We also talk about the importance of building new learning pathways, unbundling higher education, adopting new credentials, micro-credentials in how we see how to structure like an education learning pathway, which is very important, especially in how the talent mobility now, and people can have a lot of options and choices, and how you define as part of the credits in the university. And last but not least, of course, like the work environment should also be part of the learning spaces. How this can also be represented in how we see about transforming education. So not only looking again at the traditional learning spaces, but also the workspace is also part of it. So those are some of like the key takeaways that I can share with you. First, I talk about the leaders' declaration, the highlights of our key points there. And second, I talk about the process, what's going on in education working group, how we decided on the 4 core topics, and how we talk about the recovery and the transformation of education, especially related to the future of work. I think with that, I end my sharing with you this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Iwan, for wonderful remarks and also sharing experience from the Education Working Group G20. It is really interesting because yesterday Ramiro presented some different issues about future of work between the perspective of Global North and Global South. I think my colleagues later on will follow up with some questions on that. But before that, I would like to give the floor for Professor Jisman Simanjuntak, the chair of co-chair of T20 Indonesia 2022. The floor is yours, Pak Jisman.
Thank you very much. Selamat pagi sekali lagi. I was lead co-chair of T20 Indonesia together with my colleague, Professor Bambang Brojonegoro, who is now, I think, in Delhi for handover session today to T20 India. This afternoon. My daily responsibility is being rector of Prasetya Mulia University. We have a relatively big business study program, relatively young STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we plan to open Polytechnic starting 2025. We are preparing for it. And the idea is nothing but to get people more prepared for the coming technologies of complexity. Probably in 10 years, we will be working for the digital technologies rather than digital technologies working for us. Now back to T20. We consider it a success. Number one, we amplified existing network among think tanks around the world, particularly domestically. Believe it or not, there was little connectivity between policy research institutions domestically. CSIS, of which I am chairman of the board of directors of the foundation, we are much more connected with similar institutions around the world through what we call Council of Councils, rather than with domestic institutions. So forum like this, I think, will be increasingly needed for us. And T20, I think, has contributed to this, and we should maintain this. We established 9 task forces. And the task forces reach out to an extensive network of universities and research institutions. The topics we cover in our task forces include number one, open trade. Open trade, because we believe that we have all benefited from open trade in one way or the other. Sometimes there is imbalance, but over time, I think in the end, we create or re-establish balances. Number two, digital connectivity. We realize that what we have harvested until today are just the low-hanging fruits of digital connectivity. The bigger harvest is yet to come when machines communicate with machines in an extensive way. IoT, yeah? When life increasingly depends on technologies like crypto. Number three, governing climate change. We realize that commitments have been made in so many meetings and fora, and the last one is COP27 in Egypt. But how do we walk the talks is the real challenge in climate change. Food security. We also realize that climate change is closely related to food security. And partly because of the war in Ukraine, we are faced now with problems of food insecurity in a number of places. Another task force is inequality and human capital. Thank you, Pak Iwan, for the very enlightening speech on education. I think I agree with you. In the end, inequality boils down to inequality in human capital. And inequality in human capital results in unequal access to new technologies. And I'm an economist by training, and unequal access to technologies necessarily means unequal benefits from what is taking place in the market. And then global health. We are happy with what G20 agreed upon on global health. And then international finance and recovery. I think recovery is very close to the special topics we are addressing in this meeting, because without recovery, there is no job. And then resilient infrastructure, resilient and smart infrastructure, infrastructure that can communicate with one another. Lastly, global cooperation for SDGs. Actually, when it's come to issues, we have them all under SDGs. I cannot think of issues that are not covered under the SDGs. But how do we mobilize cooperation to get these Gs attained cooperatively? And cooperation, as we all know, is the pinnacle of evolution, not competition. Probably, I don't know about other sciences, but in my field, we are much more better trained in about competition compared to cooperation. We can explain competition meticulously, but not cooperation in economics. Our models are mostly models of competition. So, and I think the largest deficit facing the world today is the deficit of cooperation. All the major institutions are handicapped. WTO is handicapped despite a relatively successful ministerial 12 in Geneva in June this year. So cooperation, cooperation. And I think we include this in our communique, the spirit of cooperation. This, I think, is the main responsibility of leaders, to maintain spirit of cooperation alive despite problems as difficult as the war in Ukraine. Now, let me pick a few issues that are probably worthy of further discussion. G20 and engagement groups derived from it is a governance mechanism, crisis-driven governance mechanism. If I may say, with many hats, big hats, but very little foots and hands. Very rich in idea generation, but very weak in implementation mechanisms. So in our communique, we emphasize that what G20 leaders should agree upon is concerted actions. Unlike IMF, with established mechanisms of implementation, we don't have it in the case of G20. So it's concerted. How do we transmit G20 agreements into policy actions nationally? And we can only expect that to happen voluntarily. It is a crisis-driven institution, financial crisis. And what is this financial crisis? We sometimes think we know what it is, but it keeps moving, this crisis. It has domestic dimension, and it is going to be with us forever. Because the reason is very simple. Supply of good assets is always limited compared to demand for good assets. That's why sometimes we experience this boom and bust. And such crisis requires cooperation among governments. What is the other element of this crisis? A very structural one. Our financial system governance, financial governance, still remains in the format of post-World War II design, Bretton Woods system. Some people call it Bretton Woods system 1.0, with the dominant position of the US. While life has changed, realities of life have, I would say, unrecognizably shifted. With China, with Korea, with Brazil, and now India, the new big star, India, Vietnam, etc., ASEAN. But we still stick to Bretton Woods 1.2. So this is one of the crises. How are we going to move to Bretton Woods system 2.0? Unless we are able to engage China, to engage emerging economies in the design of financial architecture, I think we are not going to be out of this crisis. And financial crisis is only one of the crises confronting us. We have food crisis, and this can strike anytime, depending on weather and climate. Number two, health crisis, we all know that. Energy crisis, not just because of the war in Ukraine. Worsening inequality. I would include this as one of major crises. And I congratulate Smeru for doing a lot of works on this. Worsening inequality. What is this? Why does it persist despite best brains dedicating themselves to search for solutions? Is it the problems of disappearance of job because of automation? Is it the decline of union that we observe everywhere? Is it the case that our policies have been taking side with large corporations over the last 50 years? I don't know what the reasons are, but one thing I read this from another scholar, of course. In the end, inequality is reflection of uneven access to new technologies. And this uneven access to new technologies is rooted in unequal human capital. And human capital, not just education, but health, literacy, and set of skills. We also have crisis of the market system. I cannot talk more about this, but I think this is very important. Climate crisis, and also inability of democracies to form an effective majority. We face this in many countries, including established democracies. Now, given all these crises, what is it that we can expect of G20 to perform? Let me now touch upon, just mention a few paths to G20 reform. Number one, this is my personal belief. I think to be effective, to deliver to people, G20 needs to return to its original intent. Crisis management mechanism, particularly financial crisis. But not only big finance, but also talking about people's access to financial resources. Number two, G20 can and should convene if circumstances require to deal with specific issues, like health issues over the last 3 years of pandemics. Number three, recharging the WTO. We all need WTO. Without open trade, we cannot possibly enjoy the digital revolution at the price that it is offered today in the market. We need this. Number 4, second best governance. Second best is sometimes called minilateralism. We have regional groupings here, such as ASEAN, European Union, and the likes, and interregional cooperation, ASEAN, EU cooperation, etc. And plurilateralism, plurilateral cooperation on certain issues. Something like our cooperation in e-commerce, which is renewed under the ministerial 12 of the WTO last June. And we can think of similar arrangement for other important issues. So these are, I just mentioned a few reforms, ideas that I think should be pursued for the effectiveness of G20. And I hope T20 Indonesia can really cooperate with India and Brazil, the Troika, to secure a continuity in its works. And with this, I would like to end my talks. And I hope once again, one of the most important dividends of T20 Indonesia is the cooperation network among policy research institutions in Indonesia. And let's maintain this, further develop this. And my appeal also to donor institutions from around the world, supporting this network is really a good work. Thank you very much.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for these reflections. Well, I'm Ramiro Albrias. Many of you know. Now we will follow with our Indian colleagues, but first let me say that it was really, I don't know, there are a lot of ideas there and lessons from both of you. I think that thinking about connecting both, of course that the G20 started as a crisis-driven governance mechanisms. I like this, to think how to engage discussion on transformation in terms of Pai-Wan's presentation, right? Because crisis is more about short-term problems, mainly financial, but what about, as you say, other crises, but also what about these long-run issues? Transformation is like a process, but if you are each time just discussing short-term problems, it's really hard to think how can we design proper discussion and progress in long-run issues, such as education. So I don't know, maybe I imagine you in your working group trying to bring these long-term issues into a daily discussion on short-run problems, such as, I don't know, pandemic. Well, maybe we will have more issues like that regarding health, but we were all thinking about the daily, solving problems. And G20 is, in history, it was a lot about solving problems, really quick and really pressing problems. But what about these, long-run problems that will be even more important, but that in a way, social discount rates for these problems are too high. No one is discussing that. So I'm wondering how can we, find maybe some like 2 work streams for a G20, and one more back to the original, on crisis and fast solutions and places for cooperation on that. And on the other hand, one on transformation, that is more about thinking long-term, or even medium-term. So in a way, and also maybe trying to bring in the G20 an idea of a continuous agenda on some topics. You know, that's also, I think, that hard to do given the history of G20, of, you know, working on it being, you know, governance or cooperation on crisis, on short-term issues. So I think, I don't know, that was my reflection on Pai-Wan and Professor Shishman's comments. Thank you very much. And now we're moving to our colleagues from India. If you want, you can come here or to present your whatever. Yeah. So I don't know if we have, maybe I can. Well, maybe you can stay here and then you can. Well, here, let me introduce you to both of them. I mean, Pankaj Banishit, he's an associate professor in research and information systems for developing countries. Thanks, Pankaj, for being here. And yes, okay. Yes, maybe because you are going to be presenting, right? Here on stage. Okay, and here we have Pratik Kutreja, who is a fellow in the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, ICRIER. ICRIER, it's easier, ICRIER than all these names. Of course, we don't have yet the concrete plans for the G20 India. I think that today they will announce the task forces as well as the handover. But we need to hear you talking about the Indian priorities and issues regarding labor markets and the future of work on the one hand, and then some specific discussions on how to connect this with the G20, T20 ecosystem. So I don't know, maybe do you want to start or you?
I can start.
Okay, go.
So thanks a lot. And first of all, let me thank CPEC and Sumeru for having me here and for the wonderful hospitality for last couple of days. As Ramiro was saying that I was asked to talk about the Indian priorities when it comes to the future of market, future of labor for our coming T20. And you know that we haven't declared any priority as of now. Today afternoon, we are going to have the official handover. And there you will see a presentation by the Indian delegate spelling out our priorities and different task force, what are the different themes. So we will have a clarity by this evening. But for my presentation, what I'm going to do is, what I discussed with Ramiro and decided to do is that I will be giving you a broad idea about the Indian labor market, what's going on there. And from there, I will try to identify what are the major challenges India is facing right now. And in that context, I feel that those challenges should be the priority when it comes to the T20, because that's the issue India is facing. So can we have presentation?
Yes, we are still trying to.
Okay, not an
Have
issue.
the presentation?
And pardon me, I will be boring you with few slides which are going to be repetitive in nature, which you might be knowing about the global story and which you have also heard over the last one and a half day. So just to start and give the context and put India case in that context, I'm going to have few slides on what is the debate about future of work, what's going on, what are the evidences there, and what kind of policy recommendations are coming up. And broadly, as Ramiro yesterday was talking about, this work is from the first world countries. So in that context, I mean, just to set the context, I will be having a couple of slides on that. So if you don't have, then I can start.
Yes, maybe you can start because maybe in 5 minutes it will be.
Okay, not an issue, not an issue.
Okay.
So we all know that for last few years, there is a lot of discussion about the future of work. And in fact, if we go back and try to find out when this debate started in the recent time, it was actually in mid-90s when a few scholars, not scholar actually, few public commentator started writing about the end of work. There is a famous book by one entrepreneur which proposed this hypothesis. But in last couple of years, especially starting from 2013, when World Bank came out with their annual report on jobs, this debate has become more pronounced. And the reason is that the technological progress, new technologies which are coming into the market in terms of AI and advanced robotics, have put a question mark on the sustainability of jobs which we have right now. And we all know that different scholars have tried to give some sort of projection that how many jobs we can lose in near future. So that ratio actually varies from 56% to as high as 70% in case of India. Now, obviously, I mean, you know that there are methodological issues. I think GIZ has been doing a lot of work on that. And there is different methodology, which if you use that, then it gives you a slightly, mostly very low number of jobs which are at risk. So that debate has been there about the quantification, but scholars which actually don't buy this hypothesis of end of job, end of work, they actually go back to the history and try to tell us that, look, this is the fourth industrial revolution. This is not the first industrial revolution. So we have successfully navigated through the three industrial revolution. And throughout the history, we have seen that the structural employment hasn't gone up. Though the great economist Keynes was talking about the technological unemployment, but it never came. So the optimism actually comes from the history. And if you look at the literature, you will find scholars have identified different channels through which technology compensates and creates more job than it destroys. So overall, the main argument basically coming from the mainstream economist is that, look, the direct impact of technology on labor is going to be negative. But there are indirect channels through which technology creates more job. So in long run, the impact of technology on job is not negative. It's going to be a little bit positive or neutral, but it's not going to destroy your job. So structural employment is not going to increase. So according to them, technology brings a lot of change in terms of job mix. So it destroys the demand for certain skills, it increases the demand for certain skills. So it leads to the labor market disequilibrium, which leads to the increase in wage disparity, to which you have to take different measures to adjust to this disequilibrium, to correct this disequilibrium, to mitigate the unequal effect of technology on labor market. And according to them, this wave of technological progress is going to create same set of implications for labor market. And so, okay. Can we have it? Yeah. So this I have already covered. So there are different channels which literature has identified how they compensate for the negative impact. So in history, I mean, we have seen that technology has not destroyed job, but some argue that this time it may be different because now we are heading towards the era of artificial intelligence where machines will be able to create machine. So all the compensation mechanism, some say that it's not going to be valid in future. And major proponent of this thought is basically two scholars from Solon School of MIT, which talk about the great decoupling. So decoupling is basically, they are saying that the productivity is rising, but it is not increasing the wage rate. So according to them, there is a great decoupling. So it means
the technology is increasing labor productivity, but it is not raising the wage rate and lifestyle. So in near future, we will end up with a problem of no work. But that hypothesis, some scholars recently have debunked with their more empirical work and argued that still we don't have any evidence to support this hypothesis of great decoupling. Nevertheless, as I was discussing, the scholars agree that the impact of technology or implication of technology for labor markets are going to be more subtle in terms of changing the job mix. So one hypothesis which has gained a lot of prominence is the task bias technological change. So according to this, this particular wave of technology is actually reducing the labor requirement for routine tasks, but it has increased the labor demand for cognitive and analytical task content. And that's why, the disequilibrium has appeared in the labor market throughout the world, especially in the developed country. They have shown this in terms of polarization of labor market. And it has led to the increase in wage disparity. Now it has implication. This changing task content of job has many implications, mostly in terms of our education system, because now with this kind of change in labor market, we need to work for the skills which are going to be in demand, and we have to adjust our labor system that the skills are imparted to the labor which are going to be in demand, not the skills which are not longer going to be in demand. Plus, this task content has serious implication when it comes to the different segment of the society. Because if you look at traditionally in West, you will find that there are some sections which don't have this kind of skills which are in demand right now. And even in case of India, there are underprivileged section of the societies which don't have that kind of skill and that kind of education which are in demand, but they rely mostly on kind of routine job and physical job for which the demand is declining. So it is going to have a serious implication for social inequality also. So we need to upgrade our education system to tackle this kind of challenge. Then there is another hypothesis that the technology change is so fast that you don't know whether what kind of skill is in demand right now, whether the situation is going to be same tomorrow or not. So the hypothesis of the discussion about the reskilling and lifelong learning has come into the play. Then another issue is the whole issue of rise of gig economy and changing employer-employee relation. So it has implication in terms of informality. But as Ramiro was yesterday saying, that situation is different in developed and developing countries, because in developed countries, almost 100% people were former worker. They were having the pension benefit, unemployment benefit. So for them, it's a serious problem. But for countries like India and other developing countries, that may not be the case. So we'll come to that. So this is the broad debate about the future of work. Now, what about India? So first, before going to identifying the challenge, let's have a look at about the evolution of Indian labor market. So here you can see that how the composition and the quantity of labor supply in India has changed over the last 3 decades or so. So 2-3 things stands out. One, the Indian labor market, as you know, that we are going to be the most populous country, and it also reflects in our labor market in terms of the sheer number of people who are participating in the labor market. And you can see that in 84, the total people engaged active in the labor market were slightly less than 300 million, which has increased to slightly less than 500 million. But the more radical change is observed over the last 6 years. So during last 6 years, almost 9 million people are joining labor market every year. So you can imagine what kind of inflow is there in the labor market. So this quantitative change has also accompanied with significant qualitative improvement in terms of supply of labor with graduate, secondary and tertiary education. So in early 80s, a large section of the people involved in the labor market were illiterate, whose share has declined rapidly. But the share of secondary people with secondary and above secondary education has increased substantially. But one thing which is a cause of worry for India is that despite this increase, the proportion of people with vocational skill has not witnessed any significant increase. It's still less than 2%. So this is the broad change in Indian labor market. Now look at the occupation structure, demand side. So demand side, again, there are some noticeable change in terms of increase in the share of high skilled professional and occupations in the total employment. But unlike developed world, we don't see the polarization of labor force, because the employment is not growing at the lower end. It's still declining. Upper end, it's increasing. And plus, we don't see much of a decline in plant machine operator and craft related trade worker, which are more of a routine occupation in nature. So in terms of research on India about the technology and future of work is concerned, there are few attempts which have been made, but there is issue with the availability of data and other. So I will not go into that detail, but in just in a passing remark, I can tell you that given the data limitation, we don't have any study which concretely tells us what is the rate of technology adoption in India and what kind of labor market implication it is having. So I did a couple of studies on Indian manufacturing sector. Even in that case, the proxies which are used for technology are not very reliable. I mean, we don't get any information on the robotics or any advanced technology which is being used directly. So very crude measures have been used as a proxy of technology like TFP, and then there is something called ICT capital, but it doesn't include robotic. So if you go deep, you find it only talks about the office equipments, which doesn't make any sense. And as far as the task content is concerned, again, the problem is that you need occupation task content information. For India, that is not available, but I did that by using ONET, and you can see that there is change in task content, and actually it is very much in line with this change in occupation. Again, I mean, it can be criticized because the task intensity has been used from the ONET, which is for the US, not for India. But since I was interested in trend, then I mean, it gives us a fair idea of direction. Don't go by the volume or just go by the direction. Then we have some idea, and it shows that the two non-routine cognitive and analytical task content has increased, but our routine cognitive task content is still holding. But at least it is at the aggregate level. So there is a story, if you go deep, especially we have a dual economy. We have organized sector, we have an unorganized sector. So we have an organized manufacturing sector. And if you look at specifically at that, you see a complete deroutinization of job, perfectly in line with the US. And though I don't have data, but since I have been to some of these big factories in auto sector, I can tell you fair amount of automation has taken place. So in auto sector, you will go and find there are 3 different shops. There's a welding shop, there's a painting shop, and there's an assembly line. So in India, I think in most of the other countries, since Indian manufacturers are basically the global manufacturers, they have shop in India. So welding and painting shop is fully automated, completely robotic. So in that sector, you see a lot complete deroutinization of job. So nevertheless, going forward, so what are the different challenges for India? Now, we have talked about the supply of labor, but what about the demand? So one way to understand the demand is to look at the unemployment rate. Now, if you look at the unemployment rate, since India is a developing country, so it is expected not to have a very high open employment. So it was the case till early 2011-12, the unemployment rate was around 2%. But all of a sudden, it has increased to roughly around 6%. And this has nothing to do with the pandemic, because this is pre-pandemic. During pandemic, it shoot up like anything. But the more worrisome trend is the unemployment rate is very high among the educated people. So among the educated youth, the unemployment rate for this year, 2018-19, was 18%. And more worrisome is if you go for highly educated worker, it is 36%, which is basically your graduate, postgraduate, PhD holder. So the unemployment rate is increasing among the unemployed worker, which basically shows that India is not creating enough decent job. So if you are unemployed, you have to survive. So you are ready to take any menial job. But these people who are coming in and joining the labor force with graduate, postgraduate, PhD degrees, they are not willing to do that kind of menial job. And that's the reason why their unemployment rate has shooting up. They are not finding the kind of job they are looking for. So the biggest problem is, and I have told you that 9 million people are joining Indian labor market every year, and this trend is going to continue for next few years. So our biggest problem is creating decent job for educated youth. Now, there is another aspect when we talk about the future of work, and especially since it deals with the skill part, then we have to talk about the skill premium. The problem with India is that we have this periodic labor force survey, which is the most authentic data source of employment for all economy. Now, there the problem is the wage data is very sketchy. So you can't actually calculate skill premium for India. If you try, you will have very unreliable number, because the information on wage is simply missing for so many observations in that data set. But there are other data sets which gives you some idea about the skill premium. So one data set which is quite reliable is the Indian Annual Survey of Industry. Again, the coverage is very limited. It only covers the organized manufacturing sector. But if we take it as an indication of skill premium, you will see that, I mean, here I have only compared this just for 99 to 2018, but the skill premium in India actually started increasing from mid 90s. It has shoot up like anything. So, but the paradox is the wage disparity or skill premium is increasing and at the same time, we see the unemployment rate among high skilled worker has also shoot up. So there the problem is, then the question arises, why? And the reason is about the poor quality of education. So if you go and discuss with the employer in India, they will tell you, oh, we want to hire people, but we are not able to fill our vacancies because we are not getting skilled people. And their argument is that even the graduates who are joining Indian labor market, they are not unemployable. And it is very difficult to train them. Now, if you look at the other study, there is one institution in India called Pratham. So what they do is every year, they collect information, they go to different schools, and then they ask the students to read and do some basic mathematical calculations. And their survey findings are actually very worrisome. They show that the majority of students in India, they can't read basic text and they can't perform very simple calculation. So now with this survey, if you look at the people in industry which are complaining about that people are not employable, plus even if we hire them and you want to invest in training, it's very difficult because their learnability is a problematic. So it looks very, very plausible proposition. So second important issue which India right now is facing is about the skill development, quality of education, and improving the overall learnability. So supply of skilled worker has increased, but quality has remained very, very poor. So that's another challenge which India is facing right now. Now, third is the informality. Ramiro was saying that the informality is becoming an issue in developed world. And he was saying that story may be different in developing country. That's exactly the case. I mean, in India, in 1999, 2000, almost 93% people were in informal sector. So it's basically they were not having any social protection. And the worrisome part is, as I was telling you, that we have dual labor market, we have dual structure economy, we have informal sector and we have formal sector. But if you look at the employment structure, even within the formal sector, you will find almost 1/3 of the labor force engaged in the formal sector are informal in nature. So they are actually contract worker, and most of these people don't have any access to any social security net. But over the last couple of years, last 4-5 years, Indian government has provided some financial assistance or incentives to the employer to increase the formality. So we see some changes, so some decline in informality, but still 90% of our labor force, more than 90% of labor force is still in the informal sector. So third challenge which India is facing is about the formalization of labor force or extend universalization of social protection. The fourth and another important challenge is the low and declining female participation. Now, it again kind of very paradoxical. If you look at the supply side, even the gross enrollment ratio of female in schools, education, any level, you will find female are doing really well. Their enrollment has increased. Even in STEM education, 43% of graduates in STEM are female, but you don't find them in the employment. I mean, they are not in the labor market. And you'll see the labor force participation has been declining continuously. So, I mean, there is a huge debate. I'm not going into that, but there are societal issues and there are other issues. But India is facing this issue that how to increase the female participation, because female are the 50% of our labor, our population. Now, if the 50% is not fully participating, it's a problem for a country. So how to do it? This is something I think India will be more keen when it comes to the T20 and getting understanding from other countries that what are the ways to increase female labor force participation. Then the final thing is about the platform economy. Again, it's related to whenever we talk about the platform economy, we talk about the informality and all these issues. But for developing countries, it is actually a positive thing as well as negative thing. So positive thing, I think Pratik will talk about, and yesterday Prerna was giving an example that how the arrival of platform is facilitating and empowering some of the people who were not, despite having some good skills, they were not being able to participate in the labor, but platforms are enabling them. And in fact, in India, the number of gig worker or people involved working on the gig worker has been quite significant. So right now, according to the Niti Aayog estimate, so we have a government think tank known as Niti Aayog, I think you may be aware. So slightly less than 8 million people are gig worker in India. And within next 8-9 years, it's going to increase by 3 times. And India is going to be the economy where the gig economy is going to be number of gig worker is going to increase at the highest rate. Now the problem is, despite offering good opportunity for the worker, there are issues. There are issues that most of these gig workers, they don't have any access to the social protection. And the worst part is that despite high informality, if you go to India, and you will find that there are different settings like micro enterprises. So micro enterprises are basically, I own that enterprise, I hire only 1 or 2 person. Now that person is informal, he's not getting any social protection. But because since there is a connection between employer and employee, they are face to face, they get some advantage in terms of if they are sick, they don't lose their wage. So still, I mean, he will only tell his employer that I'm not sick, I can't come for 2 days. And that employer, being a human, because it's a human to human interaction, they'll say, okay, we will not deduct your salary. But with the gig worker, that's not the case. So the challenge India is facing, that on the one hand, platforms are actually offering a lot of advantage, a lot of opportunity to India. But at the same time, there are issues of safeguarding interest of gig worker. So the challenge is how to design the appropriate regulation for the platform economy to ensure that the platform economy thrives, but at the same time, we also end up safeguarding the interest of gig worker. So I think in the context which I mentioned, these should be the priority for India when we go for our T20. Basically, the 5 challenges which I have mentioned, these are the priorities. So thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pankaj. I think that we have a lot to discuss on that, and just a reflection after a presentation is that many of the topics that you mentioned about India are quite common, at least in other South Asian countries, some Middle East countries, some Latin American countries, some Saharan countries, and in a way they are not discussed in the future of world literature at all. Maybe you can say one paper, but not as a main issue. You are talking about the biggest labor market in the whole earth, and we are not talking about these issues. So in a way, it's kind of, I think that we need to think how to reframe the discussions. You cannot say, I'm going to talk about the formal labor market and then some section of the informal labor market. No, maybe it's kind of, I mean, you are saying that 90% of the workers are without social protection. So we need to start there and then maybe discuss formality, So in a way, I think that you just gave us some facts and data, but you are also talking about a different agenda, and at least a different approach to the future of work. So thanks about that. Maybe then we can return to that later. So Pratik, you have been working on on the creative economy in India, and again, in India is also trying to pursue a different, we can say, globalization model where services is playing a bigger and bigger role, and maybe thinking about these sectors of related to creativity is also a good way to seek to check which sectors need to be fostered, in thinking about India and the global economy. And also, I want to hear you about this idea that we discussed before about, we are thinking that, future jobs are just, being a programmer, something like that, and you are maybe thinking about something else. So I want to hear you about that.
Thanks, Ramiro. Good morning, everyone. I think let me first echo Pankaj in thanking Ramiro, Megan, and the colleagues from Sameru and GIZ for such a fantastic organization. I mean, organizing a conference in developing countries in itself can be very challenging. You have connectivity issues, and I can say that coming from another developing country. So thank you very much for a fantastic hospitality and a fantastic organization. So yeah, before I actually start with my presentation, I'll actually try to begin from where Pankaj ended his presentation. But can I? Yeah. So before I start, let me give you a brief structure of how I'm going to structure my talk. So I'll start with a brief snapshot on India's labor market. Pankaj has talked in detail about India's labor market, but I'll give some, I'll give a brief recap of the figures and facts. Then I'll move to what we call as the creative economy. So I really liked. There was this figure. I don't know if you really saw the first figure that Pankaj showed, where you had people turning into machine and machine then kicking away the person. So there was a talk, I remember somewhere around 2016 and 2017, when there was this discussion on future of work that really started, that technology is going to kind of destroy jobs. It's going to completely transform the world of work. And that's where the word future of work really emerged. Fortunately or unfortunately, nothing of that really happened. I mean, it happened to some extent, but it didn't really kind of happen to that extent that we had possibly imagined. But yes, there are certain jobs that really got destroyed due to technology. But at the same time, there are certain jobs that are not destroyed, that are more technology resilient, and not just technology resilient, they've been adaptive to technology. And these are the jobs that we call as the creative jobs, or one of those jobs, or one of those sectors, one of those economic activities are the creative economic activities. And I'll come to what creative activities or creative industries or creative occupations really are. We've recently done a study in partnership with the ADBI. Peter was there yesterday. So we did a study with them looking at the creative occupations, particularly for India. It's very difficult to kind of define creative occupations or creative industries, because it's something that since there is no definition of creative economy, it's difficult to define what occupations you can call creative or what industries you can call creative. So UNESCO or UNCTAD, they've been working on it and trying to kind of classify creative industries and creative occupations. We've done a similar study for India. So it hasn't been, we've just finished it. It will be out in public in the next like a couple of weeks. So I'll go to what creative economy really is, how it is really defined in the world, and then we'll move to a short discourse on India's creative economy, or how we have defined India's creative economy. And then how has the pandemic, as we all know, has been really disruptive. It hasn't left any sector unaffected. So how has that impacted the creative sector, the cultural sector, and whether after the pandemic, how this sector will then pan out after this, after the pandemic. And then we'll move to some policy recommendations for India, and as India moves to chair the G20, what should be the policy recommendations that should be really placed on the table as far as this sector is concerned. So just to begin with, let me just give you a brief snapshot of what a brief recap of what Pankaj has already talked about. We have a large and young labor force. 62% of our population is in the working age group, and more than 50% is below 25 years of age. So we are, at that cusp. We are enjoying the demographic dividend, but it will not last for long. So it can be a double-edged sword for us if we are not able to employ them. So yes, we have a dualistic structure, as he rightly pointed out. We have an organized sector that exists with a large unorganized sector. We have jobless growth. There is a rising disconnect between the GDP. GDP growth is really impressive, but it's not really creating enough employment. So yes, there's jobless growth. Only 0.13 million jobs have been created in the last year, while 13 million people are added to the workforce every year. So that's the extent of crisis in the job market that we face right now. Along with that, we have a skills crisis, as Pankaj had pointed out. Merely 2% of India's total workforce is skilled. And then automation, as I've already mentioned, up to 69% of jobs, due to automation could be replaced in India as per the World Bank estimates. So the fear is not gone, fear is still there. So we're still, threatened by technology. So far, we've seen 3 industrial revolutions since the 18th century, and all of them have created and destroyed jobs. 4 specific developments that have taken place as far as Industry 4.0 is concerned. We've seen high-speed mobile internet, AI and automation. Of course, there's been artificial intelligence. I mean, it's coming to the developing countries slowly, and I think Pankaj pointed out in some of the welding industries, and you do see robotics to a very large extent. So it is coming to the developing countries as well. And big data, of course, big data has already been introduced in the developing countries, particularly in software, and then the cloud technology as well. So we've seen 4 specific developments taking place in the 4 versions of the IR. The world of work, as I said, has been transforming very fast. Estimates indicate that more than 65% of students who will enter primary education today will likely end up in jobs that do not exist currently in about 15 years from now. So that's how rapid the world of work is transforming. talking about future demand for non-routine cognitive skills. And I think some of it Pankaj had already mentioned, is rising much faster than demand for any other skills, whereas demand for routine manual skills is fading away quickly. And that's where the creative industries now, I'm going to place them in this context, because according to the World Economic Forum report, creativity, originality, and initiative were amongst the top 5 skills demanded by 2025 as perceived by companies globally. So against this backdrop of crisis in the labor market and technology kind of aggravating that crisis, pandemic not helping, there is this sector that really offers you a great opportunity to kind of drive the future wave of growth. That is the creative industries. Now, what are creative industries? You know, it's as I said, there have been efforts to define creative industries, and these industries that you can see on your screen are basically the industries that UNESCO calls the creative industries, and these industries have been kind of taken as the creative industries by almost all scholars or economists who work on creative industries. These are design, architecture, art and craft, advertising, R&D, publishing, fashion, film, video and photography, music, performing arts, software and computer games. But you know, just a disclaimer before I move further, these creative industries, and UNESCO also kind of acknowledges the fact that you cannot have one definition of creative industries. It is an evolving concept. It varies across countries. It varies across time. So creative. So what is creative according to the US may not be creative according to India. What is creative, you know, for UNESCO may not be creative for me if I'm working on creative industries. So a better way we thought to approach creative economy is through looking at occupations rather than industries. And I think we were having an informal discussion the other day, and me and Ramiro, and so rather than looking at industries which are very heterogeneous in nature, when you look across countries or look across time, it's better to look at occupations, and I'll come to India's creative occupations. But before that, let me move to why is it important to really focus on creative economy? What is the significance of creative economy? And I'm talking about the global picture right now. I'll come to India in a bit. Globally, and all these estimates are very underestimated, because most of these studies do not really take into account the huge informal sector, particularly in the developing countries. May not hold that much importance in the developed countries, but if you're talking about developing countries, there is a huge informal sector, and these estimates do not account for that. So these are very, you know, if I want you to look at these figures with a pinch of salt, because these are very underestimated. So when you talk about employment, UNESCO says that it employs around 29.5 million people globally. Just to give you the scale, it also accounts for 6.7% of all LinkedIn users globally. Of course, LinkedIn is not something that, you know, it's not really a representative sample, but just to give you a scale. In terms of output, it accounts for around 3% of global GDP, again, UNESCO estimates, and again, very underestimated. In terms of exports, growth rate in exports has been over 7% between 2002 and 2015. So you can imagine the way this sector has really progressed over the last 10 years or so. And in terms of exports, the world's top 10 exporters of creative goods, you can see on the screen: China, US, France, Italy, Hong Kong, UK, Germany, India, Switzerland, and Singapore. One interesting fact that you will realize looking at this figure is that out of these top 10, 7 are a part of the G20. So that's where this issue is so important in the G20 as well. Not just the G20's significance is significant. Within the G20, this sector plays a very important role, because in G20 nations such as China, France, India, Italy, Turkey, and the UK, creative goods account for over 5% of their total country exports. So yes, it is the G20 plays a significant role globally, but within the G20, this sector also plays a very significant role. So now I'll come to India and defining India's creative economy. And this is based on, as I said, a study that we did in partnership with ADBI. It's about to be released very soon. We've tried to define India's creative economy. And how we've really defined India's creative economy is by talking to few people through stakeholder consultation and a review of past literature. We've tried to identify 4 basic characteristics of creative economy that are relevant for India. And these are the 4 basic characteristics. These are knowledge-based economic activities. These activities are based on knowledge that is acquired either formally through education channels, but more importantly, it is acquired, it is inherited across generations. The one way, of course, is how you acquire basic skills. But more importantly, these skills are acquired across generations. I'll give you an example. I don't know if it holds true for Indonesia as well. A lot of these artisans and craftsmen and, in India, they don't go for formal education for those designs, textile designs and handicraft design. They acquire that talent through the generations. And similarly for cuisines, some of India's cuisines, if you go in Old Delhi or things, the recipes that they have get acquired across generations. So these are the creative talents that they get, the knowledge that they acquire across generations. So that's one of the very basic characteristics of creative activities if you talk about India. Secondly, and very importantly, these should embody original ideas and imagination. And that's where the issue of copyright or intellectual property really comes in, because these ideas are not duplicated or these ideas are not repetitive. And that's why it is immune to technological change, because these are original ideas. So the second very important characteristic of these creative occupation is that it should embody original ideas and imagination. While it is the original ideas are important, these ideas should be non-repetitive and adaptive to technological change and mechanization. And again, I mean, this is very, very clear that, as long as they're not non-repetitive, they will be threatened to technology at some point of time. So these should be non-repetitive and adaptive to technological change. And last, but not the least, and most importantly, these should really characterize value chain, but not just economic value chain. It should be economic and cultural value chain. When you move from one stage of production to the other stage of production, the economic value of a product gets transferred from one stage to the other stage. But when you're talking about creative goods, it's not just the economic value that gets transported, it's also the cultural value that gets transported. You talk about, cultural goods such as handicrafts, you talk about food, you talk about, any other cultural or a creative good. There is a culture that also gets transported through different stages of production, not just the economic value. So these 4 are the characteristics that we identified, and based on these 4 characteristics, then we arrive at how we define creative economy. And just a disclaimer before that, my definition of creative economy can be very different from how you define creative economy in other parts of the world, because these characteristics are relevant for India may not be relevant for the developed world. So this is how this is how we define creative economy. It is the contribution of economic activities involving knowledge-based economic activities that is acquired either formally or informally to the economic and cultural value chain through the relation, production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, which embody a substantive amount of original ideas, skills, imagination, or social behavior, which are non-repetitive and are adaptive to technological change and mechanization. So this is how we have defined the creative economy. And this, based on this and the various other studies that have defined creative occupations, we have tried to build the list of India's creative occupation. I'm not going to go through each and every occupation, but this is broadly, and this is based on the NCO, National Classification of Occupation. And we've done a concordance between various occupation classification existing in different countries. And that's how we've been able to arrive at the India's list of creative occupations. And once we have that list, then we can kind of move to how much it contributes to employment, how much it contributes to GVA, how much it contributes to trade. So once we have defined these occupations, the things become much easier. Although, even once you have creative occupation, the problem remains is that in India, you don't really have the occupation classification at a very disaggregated level. So that challenge still remains, but still you have a broad picture of how creative occupations in India really look like. So once we have those occupations, just to give you a sense of how much the contribution is in terms of employment and some of the broad findings that we find as a part of our studies, India's largest creative industry in terms of employment generation is found to be fashion and textiles. There's a huge workforce that is involved in textile manufacturing. In terms of employment share, it directly employs 8% of India's workforce. It employs directly 8% of India's workforce. In terms of wages, if you compare creative workers versus non-creative workers, the wages are 88% higher for the creative workforce. In terms of spatial distribution, 6 of the top 10 districts are non-metros. So you can imagine the diverse nature of this industry. In terms of trade balance, creative economy still runs, despite all these facts, it runs a trade deficit of about 14.32 billion. Pandemic has not helped. We've seen contraction in GVA. The GVA by the creative industries globally contracted by $750 billion in 2020. There has been job losses. So while all the sectors have suffered due to the pandemic, this particular sector has suffered a lot because these were the people who shut down, who were the first to shut down and were the last to reopen. Because the pandemic, and that's why the effect have been more adverse for these sectors. Then mental health, which is very important for these creative workers. It affects their creativity, it affects their productivity. The pandemic has really affected their mental health, caused mental health problems, and that has really come to the fore. And digital divide, I think Prerna was talking about how digital divide is particularly adverse, or particularly challenging for women in India. So pandemic has aggravated that, particularly in the creative sector. Women have disproportionately faced obstacles as compared to men, but it has brought opportunities as well. There has been an increased demand for online media after the pandemic. The sector has managed to forever condition the people in favor of online media. You've seen OTT platforms coming in. You've seen, a lot of on-stage performances, kind of converting to live streaming, and there's been an increase in the demand for these performances. New opportunities of digitization of stage performances, as I said, making use of OTT platforms and the associated value chains. The consumers have turned into producers. You see, people posting stuff on Instagram, TikTok, no more in India, but in other countries. So while you were consuming stuff, you've also started to produce stuff. So that's how, and particularly after pandemic, we've seen a rise in that. Digital technologies have turned consumers into producers via platforms such as Instagram and YouTube. So the new creative economy in the post-COVID world, and I'll just quickly skim through it and move to the next slide. But there has been a digitization of stage performances, live virtual tours of museums. We see Google Arts and Culture Initiative offering virtual visits to about 500 museums throughout the world. There have been new models of creative tourism, the virtual tourism, as we say. Innovations in digital and virtual tourism seem to have immense potential to promote hybrid tourism and offer new and sustainable tourism models. And now, finally, I'll come to the policy recommendations. These are for India, and then I'll move to the G20. And these are based on the various consultations that we have had. The first and foremost, there is a need to increase recognition of Indian culture globally. There is a Festival of India initiative that has been organized, that can be organized at a large scale. using domestic institutions like central, at the central and state level, like the trade fair that we have in India. I don't know if many of you are aware. We can have that, at the central and state level. Expanding the Creative Cities network in India. We already have one at in Indonesia, I think ICC and Indonesia Creative Cities Network, if you're aware. We can have that in India as well. There is a need to improve access to finance, which is very important because a lot of these workers are freelancers that do not really get enough funding. So creating crowdfunding platforms like the EU, design credit guarantee schemes, particularly for MSMEs. Then I was talking about the issue of copyright and intellectual property, but because it involves original ideas and things, so there is a need to reform the intellectual property rights framework. The human capital development is very important, since you see it's a young country and a lot of young people are involved in this particular sector. There's a need to improve human capital among the youth. There is also a need for an integrated policy making institution, because there is no institution that actually manages this particular sector. There are sectors working on it, but there's no. So there is a Ministry of Culture, but for the creative economy, there is no regulation and certification kind of a body. So if we can have an integrated policy making institution, that will be really good. And as India moves towards its G20 presidency, what role can it play, as the G20 chair? Just 5 recommendations. We need an internationally acceptable definition. As I said, that's the main issue. As long as we don't have a one uniform definition, we'll not be able to arrive at a reliable measure on creative economy. We need an inter-country network to promote the cultural and creative sectors, and it will benefit because any priority that we put on the table should actually qualify 2 criteria. It should be important for the domestic economy, that is India, the host economy, but it should also be relevant for the G20 as a whole. So we need an inter-country network to promote the cultural and creative sectors. There's a need, as I said, to provide mobility grants to creative workers, where the G20 countries can actually collaborate and help in providing that. We need a digital platform to help creative workers increase their visibility, showcase their talent on a global stage across G20 countries. And last but not the least, integrating culture into the development strategies. For example, the SDG goals or the Agenda 2030. If you can integrate culture into those goals, it will become streamlined, much more easier to achieve the targets that you have for this sector. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Pratik. We are running out of time. Sorry, because we'll not have space for questions, but maybe we can use the lunch later. For that, I have just 2 minor comments from you. First, thanks for you gave us a lot of ideas and also perspectives on Indian labor markets and in a way we can say developing labor markets or the markets of the developing world. I have just 2 short questions for you. One for Pratik, maybe you can start. In G20 and T20 particularly, we have been discussing the future of work on the one hand and the creative industry on the other hand. So my question is, do you think that we can in a way connect or work together or finding commonalities there to find a common agenda?
No, very interesting question. Actually, if you see the future of work in the G20 was really brought in by Germany. We have colleagues from Germany. So into 2017, when Germany assumed the presidency, it was then that future of work really got into the agenda. And since then, when Argentina took over in 2018, then Japan, Italy, Saudi Arabia, Italy, and Indonesia, the future of work has remained on the agenda. It hasn't died away like many other issues that have actually kind of faded away through the journey. And you've seen, through these 5 to 6 or 7 years, you've seen various other issues being looked at through the lens of future of work. And now that we've been talking about developing country taking the fore at the G20, and now that the developing countries will remain on the G20 chair for the next 3 years as well, starting from Indonesia, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Now is the time to kindly, really put creative economy or look at a future of work through the lens of creative economy, because if you don't do it now, when will you do it? Because creative economy will be an important agenda for all these countries. May not be that important for developed world, or maybe important for them as well, but particularly for these countries where you have a huge informal sector, this sector will really play a big role. And so we are at a very historical moment right now, where you have a series of developing countries taking the stage. The last time this happened was when South Korea took the stage in 2010, and development consensus was really brought in. Before that, as we all know, the development was never a part of the G20. The G20 was always seen as a crisis response body. So, but since 2010, you started seeing G20 as also looking at issues that hold development importance. So now I think it's another milestone or another kind of a historical moment in the history of G20, where we can look at issues like creative economy and issues like these taking the center stage. So I think this is the perfect time to do that.
Okay, thanks. And for you, Pankaj, you have shown, I mean, this picture of the labor market in India, and I was thinking about the future of the labor market in terms of duality. I mean, are you thinking that there are ways to create a more homogeneous labor market in terms of skills, wages, and so on, or you are thinking that maybe with all these movements, for example, the export of services, and that maybe you will go into a more divide, you can say, labor markets in terms of duality. Maybe agriculture is still important, manufacturing maybe still not as modern, but then you have services, some services just being modern global. So what are your thoughts on this near future? There will be more duality or more like, less inequality across these segments of the labor market?
The goal is to get rid of this duality. But to be honest, in near future, I don't see this happening. I don't see this happening simply because, even Prateek has mentioned this. I've been saying this, that we are kind of going through jobless growth, and especially the good jobs. So the problem is that, like traditionally, the manufacturing sector has played a vital role in employment transition from informal to formal. But that is not happening in India. Our government is trying, it's trying to promote manufacturing sector, but as of now, we don't see much of movement there. So the problem is that the kind of people, the number which are entering the labor force, services, again, services, you look at the software and other, these are the shining star, but even within services sector, majority of jobs are informal. So I don't see duality going away very soon. It's going to be, we have to live with this, but the government's efforts are on, at least to extend the social protection to the informal sector. Some financial incentives are there, and now we have a new labor code, and there the focus is to extend the social protection to the people who are working in the informal sector. So efforts are there. Some movement, as you might have seen, there is some reduction in informality, but getting rid of duality in near future, at least I don't see it happening.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to both for these presentations. Now we are moving to what you have one question. Yes, you have one. Well, okay, 1 minute.
Thanks for the inputs. Really interesting. Two points struck me. You said that why there are a lot of educated students in India, it's really hard for them to find employment or to employ them in the economy. And you said that only 2% of the workforce is actually skilled. A question for me would be, what does that skill mean? What is skilling in your opinion? And second to that question, in how far do you see a cooperation also with the private sector as necessary in order to employ people in the economy.
I think Prateek will address how he has defined skill, 2%. For me, I have simply, because defining skill is a very difficult thing. So I have, being a lazy person, I have just rely on the education, what they have achieved. So when I say skill, and I mostly talk about the people who are educated with high school and graduate degrees. You have said, sorry, can you come to the first point? Yeah. So when I say skill, I basically mostly talk about the people who are with the high education, which have college degree. But the problem is that these people who are with graduate, postgraduate, even PhD degree, the problem is the basic skills, reading, writing, they are not that good. There is something called a talent shortage survey. In India, every year it is conducted. So the last survey showed that I think 48% of the people who were surveyed, basically they are the employer. They said that we are not able to fill up the vacancies which we have because we are not getting people who are equipped, who have the kind of education which we need. And they said that we are willing to retrain them. But the problem is that the basic learnability is missing. And there, I think I mentioned that we every year, an organization is conducting a survey of schools, basically government schools, to analyze the reading and computational skills of students. So what they do is they go to the 8th standard and ask these people to read a paragraph from 3rd standard or 4th standard. And they find that majority of the students who are in 8th standard, they can't read the basic text from 4th standard. And they can't do simple 2-digit multiplication. So that's the problem. That's the problem. And that problem becomes more problematic because even if employer wants to train them, he find it very difficult to train because they don't have that skills which allow them to learn. And second question, yeah. So the private sector role is very important because they are the employer. Though in near future we know the thing that the skill scenario is going to change very rapidly, but we have seen that there is a lot of increase in cooperation between government and private sector. We have a massive program, National Skill Development Program. So there is a close cooperation between private player and government to design the skilling curriculum. So that thing is very important and things are happening on that front. If you go and talk to the people who are working in this direction, they will identify you different shortcomings which are there, and definitely there are issues which needs to be tackled. But private public cooperation has increased, especially under this skill development program.
So my estimates are actually not my estimates. If I'm not wrong, they're World Bank estimates. And as you said, there are various ways you define skilling, and you cannot have one figure for that. So you might see some discrepancy here and there, particularly when it comes to skills. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. No, completely understandable. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other question? Now maybe it's fair to open. No, not you. Not you. You?
Thank you for the presentations. Very good. But I would like to, my name is Edrida. I am from the Secretary General, House of Regional Representative of Republic of Indonesia. So we are working for the parliaments and in the governments. It's very interesting for projects when you talk about kind of economy and how to face the future of work. And as you know, in Indonesia, the law draft first promoting by DPDRI, yeah, our it's like a law parliaments, and then 2015, and then knocked by DPR because we are a bicameral system 2019, and we are Indonesia as the country that promoting of a creative economy for sustainable development, and already been making in Bali and also in line with the G20. It's very interesting when you talk about the definitions of the creative economy is different to many countries, such Indonesia, also India and US, and some of them. I would like to asking you, you talk about the empowerments, like a creative economy, especially you talk a little bit about the women's, because you know, same with Indonesia, most of us are like, from you can see in Aceh till to eastern part of Indonesia, Papua, Kupang, we doing also textile handmade, and then most of them, 80% based on my research, they are the backbone of the family. And now the challenge is many of our motifs of Tenun also copied and printed, and then it's like how to just a dynamic of economics, even sometimes one make it by traditional, but also in another case it was print and recopy, and also have about intellectual property and how to make it like fair in economy. So in your country, for the government, how they can handle this situation? Because even in Indonesia, they still not mass product. They're using just only when they have a traditional cultures, traditional ceremony, they're using it. And sometimes if they don't have money, they sell it. And finally, the local government trying to push it to the market. So they're trying to push all the handmade and then make it more and more. But of course, they don't know how to the market, how to get the access of the market, how to implement it, the peoples. And one thing, there is no more what you call like, for example, the grandmothers can make a textile handmade, but now the girl, the young woman didn't want to go for this job. They want to go to the, they want to be like labor. They're going to another country to get a job, and many problems, of course. And sometimes they are going to the small shop, so there is no one want to continue this. So according to your country, it's also very rich in traditional and local wisdom for the cultures, what they do. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, and I think a lot of it holds true for India as well. And in India, you have a huge the workforce in this sector who are women, and against the backdrop of very low female labor force participation rate, as Pankaj had pointed out. See, the problems are several. The problems are manifold. They've not, the reach is a problem, but behind that, the issue is that firstly, since you don't have a definition for this particular industry, policy making becomes very difficult. So as long as you're not able to provide proper estimates, reliable estimates, how would the policy making really happen? So first and foremost, as I said, it's important to have an internationally acceptable definition of creative economy, and that's where G20 can really help. So once we have that, I think it'll be easier. And then, of course, the things like an intermediary institution to kind of regulate and, policy making institution for this sector, that will be important. But I think your point about how to reach the market, a lot of these women are using platforms like Amazon and Flipkart to kind of put their product and, reach the market. And that has been helping them a lot. So while Prerna may not agree with me, because I mean there have been distortions as well, but these platforms have also helped these people really increase their reach. So yeah.
Okay, another question? No? Yeah. Do you have a mic, or I can?
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Helmi from BRIN. I just wondering, this is very nice presentations about the future of work in India. I just wondering if you in for the next T20 will also address the issue of the green jobs, because I think it's one of the idea that starting for this in Indonesia's presidency. Also, it's really thinking about the green economy, and this green job, I think, will be one of the future of the work, and how we try to drive these digital transformations toward this kind of job. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you are right. I mean, I have not spoken much about the other task force which are going to be there. And since, I mean, I know that the focus is going to be on the sustainability. And when it comes to the sustainability, then the issue of climate, consumption, and then the whole issue of green transition comes in. So definitely, I feel that green job creation can be there, but I mean, I'm not sure. It's very much possibility it can be there. So yeah, I mean, green jobs are important, but I have a very different take on that, because green jobs and brown jobs, it's not like that. If you're going for green job, then brown jobs will be going to be there. So there is a kind of substitutability. So that's a different issue. But I think, yeah, it can be very well a priority of India, because the focus with, I don't know if you have heard about the concept of life, so which our Prime Minister has been promoting. So there, the focus is more on sustainability. And then when we talk about sustainability, the green transition is important. So green job very well may feature there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for this great overview on Indian labor markets and the creative economies. That was very enlightening. Hello. Thank you, really. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Balesti. I am also from CPEC. I want to thank the Smeru Institute for allowing us to participate in this event. We are very grateful, and for all the previous presentations and sessions. I'm going to guide you through the next session and also through the afternoon one. And this one is called Lessons from Indonesia 2022. So to a very quick recap, so far we have been discussing on two levels in parallel, right? On the one hand, on the more substantive sense, we have been discussing about the future of work. We have been also learning from Indonesia's challenges in terms of connectivity, of digitalization. We have heard from a panel of experts on the future of work and related topics yesterday. And that is the first level, more substantive one. But on the other hand, we have also focused a lot on the processes of the G20, of the T20, of other engagement groups. And the reason for this is that, of course, we are very happy to be able to take advantage of Indonesia's learning during this very important year where you have had such a crucial role. And also because the G20 is such an important forum for a topic like the future of work, which is global and which also is not just about the labor markets and the topic of the future of work, but it's also about so many interrelated topics like technology, like education, like skills, digitalization, and so much more, which is why we consider it such a key topic. This session is about still forwarding these discussions on these two dimensions, on substance and or on processes. And now we would like to hear from you, our hosts in Indonesia, our colleagues, local colleagues. We know that you have been involved in the T20 and G20 processes, in other engagement groups as well. So if we have questions for you, we would like to hear from your takeaways, from best practices. So on the one hand, we are going to be asking you in the floor, in an open question about your learnings from this. But on the other hand, we also want to ask you if you we have on the floor experts on the future of work and related topics. So we also want to ask you about the key issues at stake on this topic. So we have designed a questionnaire that you have probably already accessed, but if you didn't have the chance yet, please scan this QR code. Here you will find some questions. They are mostly oriented from our colleagues from Indonesia, who we want to hear from, but please, for the other colleagues, please write down any other questions that you may have. And what we ask you here is that you pick one of these questions that perhaps you feel that you could share some insights with the rest of the Indonesian colleagues, with the international guests as well, from India, from Germany, us to Argentina. We would all like to hear you. So please take some time, if you haven't, to read the questions and pick yours. We already have some volunteers for some of the questions. But before getting started with our own questions, we would like also to take advantage that we have still here Professor Gisman, as well as Ibu Ami from Bappenas. Perhaps we would like to start with a short question to you, if possible. Considering that we have here our colleagues from India, from 3 very important think tanks that will be part of the T20 process in India 2023, with different roles, including leading and being part of the boards of the co-leaders of the T20 as well. So if I may start with Professor Gisman, co-chair of the T20, lead co-chair of the T20 Indonesia. You started with this process, Professor, already 1 year ago. And now we have in the room colleagues who are getting started for getting ready for next year's T20 process. Is there any advice that you would have liked to have last year when you were getting started on this process that you would like to share with the colleagues from India? Is there any, I know that the process can be quite intensive, a lot of things to learn in a short time. Is there anything that you can share with them about your process?
Thank you for these questions. I wish our task forces people were around. They would be better to ask to reply to you. But let me mention a few things that we did. Number one, we communicated very intensively with Italy, T20 Italy, and even T20 Saudi Arabia, to really try to understand the issues that we need to carry forward from Italy to Indonesia. And I think the same thing will be done, at least this afternoon, during the handover meeting from Indonesia to India. Number two, despite our independence as think tanks, we consulted the government first before we draw our agenda. We discussed with Track Finance as well as Sherpa Track. And the priorities that we later translate into task forces are actually derived from the priorities of the government. We don't want to reinvent the agenda. Number three, I think it so happens that T20 Indonesia is co-chaired by 2 institutions. One is the Center for Strategic International Studies, of which I am part, and the Research Institute at the University of Indonesia. And through these 2 institutions, we managed to reach out to an extensive network of policy researchers in the country, covering all sorts of issues. Maybe that's part of the problem of G20, or discussions spreads all over to all kinds of issues. And understandably so, because everybody has something to bring into the exercise. No one can tell us really what is the most important things to be addressed within task forces or within T20 or B20, etc. We have problems with budget also. We call on renowned scholars around the globe, including, for instance, Jeffrey Sachs. We attempted to get some Nobel laureates to get involved in the discussions. We managed to get one, Abhisit, yeah, from the economic discipline. And we need this to kind of, we expect them to serve as attractors to other scholars. The policy briefs, we did it open-ended. So we received hundreds of policy briefs. And in the end, it's difficult for us to really classify the briefs into set of priorities. Yeah, difficult to rank, but they are all in the website of T20. The same applies to task forces. The task forces also had extensive networks of their own, or they are autonomous in managing the affairs of the task forces. For the communique, we also discussed with the Troika first, and then with the task forces chairs, and we organized a few meetings to draft the communique, and we also include a lot from the task forces report in the communique. We managed to communicate quite well with the Sherpa track, but more limited with the finance track. The true inventor of G20. And we didn't manage to get to our leader, to the president. We tried to organize an event in which engagement groups would be invited to meet the president face-to-face or online, in which each of the engagement groups can express, can communicate the basic core ideas to the president, but the response from there is not positive because of activities, one understand. But B20 was really something. In terms of substance as well as event, it's really amazing, yeah. And later also the G20. I attended also the B20. Everybody came enthusiastically to the meeting. As I said, budget is a problem, but we, in the end, we managed to link to ADBI, to AREA, Economic Research Institute for East Asia, with the usual 8 institutions like the Ford Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation. So in the end, I think there is no problem with resources for us. We did not receive something like grants from our government. And I think no other engagement group receives such support direct support from the government either. So that's it. I always say that in terms of issues, I think all of us are aware what is important, like these issues of war. We all know it's very important. We also deal with digital technology, and I think this is partly the problem. We are so fascinated by this digital revolution, and by doing so, pushing to the sideline other important technologies and impacts on work. Yeah, I'm an economist. I always include technology management in my courses. To me, there are actually 4 groups of technologies. Cosmic technologies. There we find the digital technologies. Yeah. Genetic technologies. And I think this is going to be more revolutionary than the digital revolution. With the genome editing, we are going to feel the impacts in agriculture, food, in health, and the like. Synaptic technologies, artificial intelligence, and crypto, yeah? And culture, this is the creative economy. A big part of the creative economy is cultural sectors, yeah? So, and I think because of the fascination with digitization, we are not able to bring forward some very important issues, including work. In economics, we now have a new stream of study. They call it modern monetary theory. Modern monetary theory. And here, the primary objective of economics is full employment. This theory says that government should do whatever it takes to get to full employment. Fiscal policy, monetary policy should be mobilized to the maximum to secure full employment. And I think this is closely related with the agenda on the future of work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. This was very insightful. Thanks for sharing your first-hand experience on this process. Ibu Ami, you are part of BAPENAS. Could you please tell us how was your involvement with the G20 process, and particularly your with labor markets? And also, let us know if you interacted with the G20 or with think tanks more in general, how that interaction was. Thank you. Yes.
No, it's not working. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you for the question, Ibu Megan. First of all, I think I'm not the appropriate person to talk about the G20 because actually I was not that much involved in both development working group actually, because BAPENAS is responsible for the development working group. But I have a little involvement in employment working group with the Ministry of Manpower. So if you ask about the process, then I don't know much. But so far, when I joined the meeting of the employment working group, the flow of discussion is very, very fluid, what I think. And one of the issues that they were talking about is also the future of work. So what I think is that this topic is still relevant because what I see from the presentation from our colleague from India, the same problem is happening to us also, to Indonesia. But I think their sheer number of population is more more amazing, I think. You have a 9 million new entrants to the labor market, we only have around 3.5 million, something like that. But our job creation during 2021 to 2022 is astounding. It is 4.25 million, and that's record breaking for us. So what I think is that this is kind of still from your question, but I think that this topic should be also talked with the next G20 meetings, and we can push more on the collective work on how to develop the skill through TVET, to vocational education and training, because we are still, Indonesia is still trying so hard to improve our TVET system to ensure that the system itself can start from the demand side. And at the moment, we are mostly our TVET system is working from the supply side. So that's one of the issues that we should address. And the second one, what we think is that, I think the same with India, we don't have a very elaborative or comprehensive labor market information system, which is, I guess that's also happening to your country. So maybe we can ask for the collective work on how we can improve the labor market information system for both of developing countries. We are striving to that. We don't have the expertise to do the analysis. We don't have the right amount of data to become the source of the analysis. And also what is interesting is that we should also address the issue of social protection, because like a dualistic country like Indonesia and India, we are struggling to ensure the membership of the informal sector workers into our social protection system. I think those three issues we have to consider to be included in this in the next G20. And also one information is that at the moment we are doing very hard to do the economic transformation. So beginning in 2023, we have to transform our economy because our productivity is declining every year. Indonesia is declining every year, and we are very going down compared to other Asian countries, our neighboring countries. So beginning next year, we are doing the economic transformation to ensure that our growth can achieve at the average of 6%, which is very difficult for us because our average growth is only around 5 to 5.5%. So I think this also should be addressed, and I hope, the future cooperation can be better, and I will involve in the discussion on the next G20. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ibu Ami. Thank you for sharing that. I think we also have a question for Professor Devanto. Heni, if you can also share with me, thank you, Professor, the question that you wanted us to ask you, but perhaps you can share with us your involvement as well with the G20 process and how you managed to reach the presidency. Yes, Heni, the president.
Basically, I'm not jointly intensive in the G20 and G20 process in Indonesia, but maybe I have some comment about the topic of the future of work, that we still have any problem that challenge for our country. because yeah, for me, thanks to the pandemic, because of the pandemic, it will make our mindset about the future of work getting closer with us. If before the pandemic, maybe we only thinking that future of work will come about 30 or 40 years later, but after the pandemic, it's getting closer, and we need to ready with the situation, because yeah, suddenly they coming. And for our country, I think we still have some problem relating with the digital issues. I think that there are two main issues that we still challenge for our country. The first one is about the literacy. The literacy is still not the disparity between urban and rural, and also the education in the city and people in the rural area is also still dispersed. And then also the infrastructure is still our problem. Java and outside Java still a big challenge for us. West Indonesia and Eastern Indonesia still also also a big challenge. So I think for the global South countries like Indonesia, and also I think a similar issue, similar characteristic with India as well, still a big challenge, and still the big homework for us to doing in the to make it closer the issue to us. But also from the pandemic, we learn a lot about the digitalization. For example, in the case of the female participation, if we learn from the India presentation, we see that female participation declining, but in Indonesia I think the result is the opposite. The female participation is increasing during the pandemic because in one hand they have to force to enter the labor market to keep the family or the household to stay in the a good situation. But on the other side, they can doing a job from their home, their house, from their environment without they need to go to other place. So it's good because the female participation in Indonesia because of the pandemic is getting higher. I think the rate is increased from 51 or 50% during the pandemic is higher, become 53 or 54%. And one of the reasons because of they use the mobile phone, they use the digitalization to do it the simple transaction or simple activities from their home for helping the household. Yeah, I think that's all that I would like to share. But unfortunately, I'm not the person that joining involved closely with the G20 and T20.
Thank
Okay,
you,
thank you very
Professor.
much.
That was very insightful. Thank you for sharing the priorities. Okay, thank you. We will. Our next question is still on the T20 G20 process. Is Bapak Asep in the room? Yes. Okay. Let me then share the question that we had for you, where you volunteered to share. The question is, which is the one agenda item or approach from the 2022 Indonesia T20 where you would want to sustain the topic through time? Please, Bapak Asep.
Thank you, Megan. Before I answer the question, I would like to share something about my experience working with the task force of T20, which may be useful for the India team and also the other countries which will become the president of G20 later. Yeah, we know that this is about the time frame. Yeah, we know that the time frame of G20 and also T20 is about 1 year. Yeah. So when I was asked to lead a task force within T20, and I see that the deliverable is to produce policy briefs and hold side events, I said, okay, 1 year is enough time to do this. Yeah. But it turned out that in reality, we don't have the 1 year. Yeah. To do all the substantive work in producing the policy briefs and discussing the substantive issues in the side events, effectively we only have about 6 months. Yeah. And that's really push us really hard, yeah, in terms of our time management. Yeah. And more than that, also we have to work with partners around the globe. So finding time which is suitable for everyone is also a challenge. So my point is that we should not think that we have the luxury of 1 year, because in reality we only have about 50% of the time to do the substantive work, because the remaining, the first 3 months is for the preparation, and the last 3 months is for finalizing all the deliverables and until the production of the communique. So I think it's not obvious, but I think it's useful to consider from the beginning.
For sure. I think this will be very helpful for our upcoming presidency, a very helpful advice. Now, would you like to comment about any special topic or approach that you would like to sustain on time?
In terms of topics, my task force, the topic for my task force is on inequality, human capital, and well-being. And that's really quite a very broad issues. It covers anything under the sun, basically. So our main job first is to really make the boundaries, which one we want to consider during our task force time. And we come up with 10 policy areas. Yeah. So these policy areas really useful for us, because it gives us the boundaries to select both the policy briefs and also the topics for the side events. So since our large topic is inequality, human capital, and well-being, so we choose about 3 or 4 policy areas for each topic of inequality, of human capital, and well-being. Because otherwise we will have too many things. It's too many things, too much of a good thing. But I think with 10 policy areas, that's give us enough. It's not too restrictive, but it's not everything. We have talked about the policy briefs, I think since yesterday, but we didn't discuss much about the side events. Actually, I think that's also one of the important, we call it deliverables, but actually it's one of our mode in collecting, in discussing the substantive issues, which is equally, at least equally important with as the policy briefs. Because with the side events, we can invite experts from all over the world who are really, who really knows about the topic, and they give us the insights that we may not get without such event. And I think the most important thing for us as the organizers of the side events, is really to have a clear and well-defined terms of reference. Yeah? And it should be specific for each speaker, not just the general TOR for everybody, but specific for each speaker, what we expect from them to be discussed in the side event. And that really helped us in producing an effective in the end communique. But when we go from policy briefs and side events to communique, we didn't do it directly because the T20 Secretariat give us a bridge through what we call as the task force notes. And that's really very useful for us because it summarizes all the challenges for each policy area, as well as the recommendations that to be included into the communique in the end. I think that's what we learned, and I hope it is useful for especially the Indian team. Thank you.
Thank you, Bapak Asep. I think it is very useful. We have now a question for Dr. Gracia, which is also about the T20 or other engagement groups. Do you have any advice or even an anecdote that you would like to share with the audience?
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Gracia Paramita and have been appointed as the co-chair of U20 Indonesia as well. As I've been involved in the U20 for 8 years and actively engaged with other engagement groups, including the T20 Summit or the T20 Indonesia group. Perhaps there are 3 points that I would like to share. The first one is about the preparations or lesson learned from the preparations of the G20 presidency team. So it's been 1.5 years, I would say, because I remember there was a first meeting on the 4th December 2020, after deciding that India and Indonesia were switched to become the G20 presidency. And then the first meeting of all engagement groups was in February 2021. And then there was also like several coordination meetings between engagement groups and all working groups, like every 3 months between the Sherpa team and all the teams. And I would say this might be a good practice for the next India G20 presidency, because when we start early as possible, especially from the substance first, because Pak Iwan, the chair of the education working group, already mentioned that there was a suggestion or request from the Sherpa team to prepare the issue notes as became the priority agendas of each engagement groups and working groups. So from February 2021 until November 2021, those were months that we had to finalize, prepare, and make sure that all the priority agendas or the topics of each working groups and engagement groups were done. And secondly, this is about the presence or like the summits itself, the events. As you might already heard that there've been 438 events, including the side events as well, while there were around 180 formal meetings between engagement group and working groups. To corroborate or to compile all those things, the Sherpa team already prepared the guidance book. So once the opening of G20 Indonesia presidency was convened, each co-chairs and chairs from working groups and engagement groups got the guidance book, and those were very simple and very easier for us to understand each substances or priority agendas from different working groups and engagement groups, even with the alignment. So during the process of making the priority agendas or issue notes, there were so many FGDs, consultations among engagement groups and working groups, and also coordination meeting, including creating the WhatsApp group of engagement groups and also the working group. So I would kindly appreciate to the G20 Indonesia Sherpa to be very active, to engage every engagement group and working groups. And there's also, I think this would be a great follow-up by keep aligning finance track and Sherpa track. So in that guidance books, there's very important alignment of the substances, for example, like MSMEs, women, youth, climate change. Those were the cross-cutting issues that can combine what the outputs or the deliverables or concrete actions from finance tracks and also Sherpa tracks. Third point will be the next step, or like the post-summit, because this is something that might be neglected, but actually very crucial to maintain the Troika itself, because there is no administrative institution in the G20. So it's very important to keep not just hand over, but transferring, engaging, and have an intensive communication. So I would like to second what Professor Chisman said, that it's very important to have intensive communication in any ways, through WhatsApp, through Zoom meetings, through any kind of tools, because that will determine how the continuing and also the legacy issues, 70% of the G20 issues are from the legacy or the previous ones, could be implemented, and also ensure that the concrete deliverables that have been initiated by the G20 Indonesia could be even developed and modified by India or even the next presidencies. So yeah, that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very helpful advices and overview. Moving on to the next question. This one is more about the role of think tanks and research centers in general. The question is for Ibu Anti. And it is about how can practitioners and researchers best support the policy making cycle? What governments need the most from these institutions?
Thank you for the questions. I think as a think tanks, we have been working very closely with the government. And when you ask about like in the planning cycle, I mean, we are working all over the cycle. But I know that as a think tank, we are doing research. So I think the most crucial part is mostly on the planning, and evaluation. Yeah, evaluation and planning of a policy and programs. Yeah, but actually, it's not only about this, how the program or the policy is developed, but also, I mean, throughout the life of the programs. Yeah, because I think safeguarding the programs is also as important as how to design it. Because I mean, when the policy is designed, sometimes the implementations could be, I mean, there is a lot of factors that coming during the implementations of the program. So that monitoring, having the governments also at the monitoring cycle is also important. But I think the most important things, I think, is what usually the governments need, and this is actually not mainly for the governments, yeah, but now it's private sectors also need, is actually a very critical but constructive, providing critical but constructive inputs, yeah, so that we are like collaborating a lot in the development of the thinkings, and then also exchange of knowledge, yeah, because sometimes what we are in the think tanks doing in the research, and when we are developing recommendations, I mean, we are thinking more on at the very high idealistic level, yeah, while at the practicality, there is a lot of things that couldn't be implementable, or yeah, so I mean, this kind of communication is very important. So I think sometimes the governments need recommendations, I mean, from the policy, but I think the more important is the process of thinking together, yeah, between the think tanks and the governments. I think that's all.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this important role of think tanks when communicating with governments. Also, the same question for Ibu Edrida. Perhaps you want to comment a little bit more on this.
Thank you very much. I think this is very good moments because we have follow up for the G20 and also we have many policy recommendations. According to me, that always have many collaborative governments in our clients for the parliaments. Many of us should be more focused on to see the law of drafts, because here we have many section of education and also we have like manpower that, and also some of education and digital transformation. In our parliament tables now, we have preparing for global, not global, government, digital government law still in process. Hopefully all the result here is a policy recommendation that can give it to the parliaments, and we will be having many tight discussions because it was very important to see in our future how we can manage some of law draft that include for the G20 meetings that have many perspective, as our fellow friends Gracia said that we have 400 more meetings. I hope it's just not only ceremonial basis, but of course it will be a kind of some of resolution and recommendation for the parliament and the government. And as you know, in our parliament also have P20 that has been done and also combined with G20, and hopefully both of them can hand in hand together for the future. And congratulations for the next host, India. Hopefully Indonesia still our fellow friends, so we can together have more better in the global. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for complementing with the government and specifically the parliamentary view. Now we can move forward for the second dimension, the substance ones about the specific topic of the future of work. Here we have a question for Ibu Atia. Which are the main structural features of global South countries that matter to the future of work?
Thank you, Megan. You speak Ibu with very eloquent ways. For the future of work, on the substantive matters, I think from the presentation, yesterday presentation, as well as Pratik and Pankaj presentation today, we know that we have very similarities. If we can say it's many similarities between us in the global South, but I think with the experience of Semeru in the TF5, the T20, we have to again highlight about the inequality in this matter, in this future of work. Inequality between in the gender areas, as Prema explained yesterday. Inequality in Pa Devanto has said about the geographical inequality, about the spatial and geographical inequality, as well as the other marginalized group inequality. So I think that one should be carried over to India, as this is we can see as the structural problems of our future of work issue. That one. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are staying in this question for a few more comments, also regarding technology and the future of work. This one is for Papak Helmi. And the question is, new technologies are disrupting labor markets. So what are some of the channels connecting technology with the world of work? And which of these channels represent threats and which of them represent opportunities? Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Megan. I think this question has been answered by the previous presentation by Pratik and Pankaj, and I actually it's also similar also in Indonesia. And the issue that I think we should really think of it is that about the inequality that can raise from the transformations, and there will be many sectors which will have different impact to them, and we have to really think which what kind of sectors that and what kind of jobs in that sectors. And if we don't think about it carefully, the transformation can be not as what we are expected for. And I think we need to think carefully about what kind of sectors that we want certain technology to enter. I think that is more important. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have to think about the inequality resulted from the
Thank you for
technology.
sharing the priority point from your perspective. We have the same question for Bapak Jimmy about the channels connecting technology with the world of work in the case of Indonesia. Is he in the floor?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. A lot have been tackled from yesterday's presentation as well, and from today's presentation. So I would just like to add a couple of things, as I've been involved in a couple of research in my work in Semeru about digital skills and inclusive digital transformation, which was presented yesterday. So talking about channels, I think there are several channels that can connect, that we can see connecting technology with the world of work, namely like human capital channel, the capital itself, like the financial capital channel, regulatory aspects of it, and also the labor movement. And we have tackled a lot about the human capital channel, and I think it's highly relevant in Indonesia, as we have kind of mentioned earlier about the level of education, level of the quality of skills, and also basic or foundational skills, as I've mentioned in the previous presentation. So education and training, training also come up in our research about digital skills. So not only the access to training itself, but also the quality, the equitable quality of different training institutions. So because regional inequality is one of the characteristics of inequality in Indonesia. So training on digital skills have been kind of more concentrated in Java Island. So the access to training for those who maybe have less educational level outside of Java have even less access to more to uplift their skill. And also the other thing is about inclusive designs that we have encountered in one of the in the research that was presented yesterday. Well, we kind of mentioned about the access of people with disability into digital technologies, not only for productivity, but just like access in general without inclusive design. For example, for those who with visual impairment or blind people, inclusive design becomes a kind of a fundamental necessity. Without that, it's not even relevant for them to talk about productivity, because they can't even access the apps or the platforms or the website or the websites or technologies in that nature. And also about labor movement, we were also kind of this is also kind of an encounter in our research that is on a new management style, which is about I think if we are looking into the discourse on the literatures, some have called it algorithm management, which may be more relevant for the platform economy. So it's more about the I think the impact of it is the easy hiring, easy firing process in which labor is impacted, especially the gig economy worker are especially impacted right now. So these are kind of the things that I think worth mentioning as well if you're talking about channels between PAC and world of work today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have two more comments for this question. One is from Bapak Faisal Amir. I'm sorry about my pronunciation, really sorry.
That's okay, that's my name.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Faisal. I want to give some comment about the topic number 6, about the technology of the future works disrupting the labor market. We understand the access of technology will change the world, especially the work of process from manual process to become automatic process. This will simplify the process, more effective and efficient for companies, and give a benefit because it give benefit and reduce its cost. The industry in the industry 4.0 era, companies has start to adopt technology change and replace human jobs into machine. The problem is this will make unemployment problems. To deal with this problem, it's necessary to develop and improve the quality of competence of workers through the vocational education and training, so that there is a synchronization between the demand and supply in the job market. We are from Ministry of Manpower of Republic Indonesia. As a regulator and facilitator, we want to contribute to organizing vocational training and worker placement according to the needs of company, especially to those companies that have implemented technology in the industrial 4.4 era. We have identified the missing and emerging job in the future. We have also recommend the companies to continue to keep their existing worker by providing the competency improvement training and maximizing production by using manpower and machine simultaneously. In the terms of vocational trainings, we have vocational training center spread in all over Indonesia. It managed by central government and collaborate with the provincial government and private training center to expand our program in all over Indonesia. The vocational training center will be able to adjust the dynamics of works in industrial 4.0 era. The vocational training center will train workers and adjust their vocational training according to company needs. And in the terms of manpower placement, because it will be access present about some new jobs in the digital transformation era ini. The government will collaborate with companies to find out specification of the workers needed in the industrial 4.0 era, and then perform the job matching according to the company needs and the availability of workers that already trained in our vocational training center. The Ministry of Manpower has developed a system called Siap Kerja. It is abbreviation of Information System and employment service application. You can access that application using computer or mobile phone, so that workers can access the application in all over Indonesia. This system gives a feature to fulfill the needs of workforce, the needs of worker and company, consisting in the information of the labor market, information on job training and job certification, and also entrepreneur service for those who wish to become an entrepreneur, and as well as other useful feature for workers and companies. This system also can accommodate a database of the workers and companies, so that governments can analyze the database to create some policy about the employment. This system Siap Kerja is one of our effort of technology utilization in dealing with labor issue, especially in the Industrial 4.0 era, which is example of positive impact of utilization of technology on the worker problems. We have in the future, the system can be a channel connecting technology to the world of work, so that the presence of technology is not a threat, but it can be used as an opportunity. I think that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing about the system. We'll definitely take a look at that. And the last comment from Ibu Agnes, please, on this same question on technology and labor market.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. I guess being the last would give me a privilege of summarizing all of the comments here. But basically, based on my understanding, there are three main channels that actually disturb the way the labor force are working in the future. The first one is regarding AI, also referred as cognitive computing, where it can process, store, and interpret massive amounts of data for more quickly and more efficient than human can. The second one is about cloud capabilities, which actually Pak Faisal has actually mentioned. Having cloud computing system can actually improve the company to reduce the need for IT management staff, which actually then ease their process of storing data and so forth. The possibility of creating virtual offsite workspace would also be possible due to these cloud capabilities. The third one is about mobile-friendly solutions, because thanks to smartphone, chat apps, industry-specific social network sites, and people significantly increase their ability to communicate, to collaborate, work from anywhere they want to work. And how to address the challenge, I think the first one is about identifying key principles and values, which I think that all related stakeholders must articulate the visions of principle and values, whether the technology itself should ensure there is a principle of equity, equality, inclusivity, like Pak Jimmy said, mentioned about disability segments, those who are living in a semi-urban or rural area, whether they have the capability to access that technology. That might be negatively impacted by the certain technology advances that being created in the future. The second one is about engaging stakeholders effectively, which means that all of the legislators, regulators, private business leaders, even researchers and civic actors need to be specifically ready to respond more responsible, and to address what would be the positive and negative impacts for the future of technology. Another thing is about how to craft suitable regulations, because obviously having this kind of very disrupt and also advanced technology requires fresh approach to policy and regulations. And last one is about enhanced transparency, oversights, and accountability, because new policy, new regulatory approaches will require greater investment in transparency. There will be new mechanisms in how to do oversights, accountability mechanisms. This is some of the key challenges that we must address in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So unless I am forgetting someone, I think we have covered and go through all of those comments of those who sign up to share learnings. Thank you for sharing so generously on your learnings from this year, both in terms of processes and T20, and also in terms of substance and the future of work and technology. I'm sure it was definitely very useful for us who have been working on this topic for several years, and I'm sure it was particularly useful for our colleagues from India. So I hope you can continue the conversations after the lunch or after the afternoon session. But now we are wrapping up the morning session. I want to invite Ibu Heni to comment on the morning session so that then we can meet again in the afternoon for the last session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Megan. Thank you very much for everyone who have shared your knowledge, your wisdom from the process and lessons from G20 and T20 process Indonesia, and also from other engagement group and government officials who are not directly engaged with G20. I know in the schedule that I'm expected to, because it is written that I will provide summary, but I think everyone will get bored if I summarize everything here, and time is already past our schedule. Maybe I would like to provide a reflection of what have been discussed since the morning, because we have listening Pak Iwan Sahril, who was education working group, who share with us the process of us facilitating in education working group, and what education working group emphasizing the collective sense of urgency in education issues. And also he mentioned a lot about the importance of collaborative efforts among countries, and finding the way that gotong royong principle in Indonesian culture can be bring to the context of G20. And then he mentioned several aspect of education system that needs to be prioritized to be relevant for the future of work, and protecting the most vulnerable group, inclusive and equitable for all, promoting lifelong learning, which actually bring me to the yesterday's discussion. Like, my reflection is that what has been discussed by us in the Forum for Digital Transformation and Future of Work yesterday, from other countries as well, are what are important for the Education Working Group Indonesia. And then that bring to the notes from him about the importance of gathering new voices from other developing countries, including African. That is, I think, that what maybe our colleagues who are working on future of works need further thinking about. And also another thing that important for us as think tank is that Pak Iwan Sahril highlighted the contribution of think tanks and international organizations. That actually my reflection is that is whether sporadic contribution of think tank or through T20, the integrating contribution of think tank through T20, or actually sporadic ones actually having similar impacts. That may be the future thinking for India, because like as he mentioned, actually education working group calling inputs from think tank like Smeru and other think tanks, but also there is a forum on the T20 itself. So how that create bigger impact if we use the T20 forum is actually something that maybe we can discuss further. Further from Pak Jisman, lesson from the T20 process and what he think is the outcome of T20 is the previously little connectivity within domestic think tank becomes connected through the process. Again, the question is how this connectivity will further provide impactful contribution of think tank bigger than before when these domestic institutions are not connected to each other. That's maybe in India, you can discover how that be maximized when the think tank link to each other through the T20 process. And another thing that I note from the Pak Jisman presentation is back to our colleague CPEC notes on the title, The Future of Work, Raising the Global Source Voice. Is that I asked him question as well, is there any debates among a think tank or between the think tank and the government in terms of the issues of future works in the global south? And that's actually, from his perspective, there is nothing. Actually, everyone has a similar understanding about what challenge and what are like impacts of digital transformation. So maybe it need to be further defined. What are the global south voice, which are not really yet into the debate or agenda of the G20. I think that is our homework for further. Otherwise, we'll have a set of list of global south priorities, which actually can be also the similar agenda of the global north. So I think we really have to pick things that really have been not in the big conversation of global north and need to be raised. And our colleagues from India raising one thing about creative economy, which actually and culture, and really interested in how that bring into the agenda of G20. I think that is maybe in my perspective after listening to the experts here, that's maybe from Indian perspective will be an important thing. But then another question is that also the agendas of other global south and how that is really need to be prioritized as G20 agendas, because we understand the resources are limited. So how we really find the global south agendas to be prioritized by the G20 and then lead to policy actions further that it's impactful for the global south. So finally, my understanding from this discussion is that there are similarities among countries in the global south, but also similarities from maybe my limited reading about the issue of future work in developed countries. And then between global south countries as well, there are differences. And then again, everyone emphasizing the importance of collaborative works. First, I think maybe what I would like to reflect from myself is how this collaboration actually can be done under the limitations of resource and time, like Pak Asep mentioned about 1 year process. Gracia mentioned that actually the process of discussion within the engagement group take longer before that, but maybe there is a need to share this knowledge that previously maybe engagement group having longer time to understand the process, but the task force like Semeru involved in shorter period of time, that maybe need to be, there is a way, mechanism or platform so that this whole process can be shared among people who involve intensively, like the one in the T20 Secretariat or engagement group, and then the one who involve partially, or the one who doesn't involve, like even Bu Ami from Bappenas mentioned that the involvement is less in the development working group within Bappenas, but involve more in the employment working group. So I think this all learning, this forum is really a great place for me, myself to learn. And I hope everyone in here can also like take something from the discussions and it will be further leading to collaborations and work that is not just collaborative, but also impactful for the agenda we want to put forward for the G20. Thank you very much. And I hope you enjoyed the session, and we will meet again in the afternoon. Megan will discuss about causal process with all of us. Thank you, and thank you.
Stolen.